Grand. I'm just starting to record now, so if anybody wants to turn off their cameras, feel free, and just make sure your sound stays muted so that it doesn't get picked up on the recording until a bit later. And obviously, if you want to ask a question, then obviously put your hand up and switch your camera on and whatever, and we can answer them as we go along. So it's lovely to have you all back again. It's been a busy month in publishing. All sorts of things have been happening, and obviously we've had a little bit of sunshine too. We might have had our summer this week already, so I hope you've had a chance yourselves to get on and do some writing, and perhaps build on some of the things that we did before. In the first session, we were very much talking about ideas and where ideas come from, and trying to write that blurb for a book, which was sort of to try and summarize your idea and get a feel for what the story was going to be about. And then what did we do last week? Last time was that about plotting? I completely forgot now. But anyway, this week, well, this month, we're going to talk about character. And for me, character is absolutely intrinsic to a book and to the success of a book. Because books basically are about character. There's this big debate in publishing and just generally about whether books are plot driven or character driven, and particularly in crime, this is a sort of consideration. But I think, and a lot of people agree with me, that without good characters, you have no plot, because it's the characters' reactions to each other and to the situations they find themselves in that give you plot. And so researching character and having good, strong characters in your story is absolutely vital. And there's lots of ways of doing that. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. So first off, when you're sort of starting out, one of the basics I do is obviously I try and come up with the idea for the story and the plot, and I write the blurb and I write an overview of what I think the book's going to be about. And then really my next step is very much thinking about who the characters are going to be, who is going to be in this story and whose story is it. When I was writing The Dark Room, I had this image of this woman running across the beach that I mentioned before. Where literally I was sitting on the beach myself, and I'd suddenly got this idea in my head of this girl jogging across a beach. She was wearing shorts and she had this German Shepherd dog lolloping along behind her. And so I knew this was something that was part of the story, and various elements of the story then grew from the area that I was in. But crucially, the character was really, really important. And so I had to have a really good think about who this girl was and what her story was. And when I started thinking about The Dark Room and I started thinking about Hare's Landing being a hotel, I felt that she must be somebody who was visiting this hotel. And in fact, the character in my head had dark hair, and she is the character who becomes Caroline in the story. But in fact, the dog belongs to her. Somebody else coming in there, belongs to Rachel in the story. So it's different. It's very much, I started off with one sort of part of a character, if you like, and it grew in different directions. And that can happen a huge amount, is that when you come up with an idea for maybe the story and you start thinking about who's going to be in it. But these characters are quite, what's the word? They're quite fluid to begin with. And they don't necessarily arrive fully formed. Sometimes they do. Kat Connolly, when I wrote the Kat Connolly books, arrived completely fully formed. She literally drove into the scene in that Mini of hers, and walked right into the house in Dorky. But that doesn't happen very often. And normally you have to have a think about them a bit more than that. So what you want to be doing is thinking about what sort of book it is. And you know, if it's a children's book or it's YA book, you need to be thinking very seriously about the age of your protagonist, and you need to do some research on that. The children's book market is very sensitive to age grouping, and it's very important that you have a character that is, children like to read about characters that are aspirational, so they like to read about characters who are a couple of years older than themselves. So if you are writing a children's book, you want to be very clear on the age group that you're writing for, and then the age group of your protagonist, and then how long that book needs to be is very important. And we need to make sure that all our characters are three-dimensional, are literally that they feel like real people. Joseph O'Connor, I think I said this before, but Joseph O'Connor has this theory that characters sort of float around in an ether above writers' heads, waiting for the right writer to land on. And sometimes when they land, often they're not fully formed, or they need to develop, or you can't quite see them all, and it takes a while for that character sort of to come through. But I think that's a really interesting idea, because when they do start to live in your head, they become so real. It's incredible. And you'll know yourself, many of you guys who are writing, that how they really take over. When you get to the stage where the characters literally are taking over and they're saying things you aren't expecting them to say, or doing things that you aren't expecting, then you know you're completely in the zone in terms of story, and that's the place really that you're trying to get to, where it's not you driving them, but where they're driving you, which sounds completely and utterly mad to anybody who doesn't write. But when you know yourself, when there are times when the writing just flows, and that's what you're trying to get to. You can only, I think, appreciate that when you've actually had a go at it. So how many characters do you have in a book? Normally you'd aim for maybe 6 core characters, sometimes less in children's fiction. And obviously there'll be some sub characters too. And understanding who those people are is crucial, as I said. So first of all, I start off trying to get hold of what their name is, and trying to work out who they might be. And names are really interesting because they can tell you a huge amount of character. And one of the things you're trying to do when you're bringing this character to the page is to show the reader as much as you can about them, but without telling them a whole ton of stuff. And names can be really, really useful. So I'm just looking at even the names on the screen here. We've got Sinead, we've got Barbara, who's actually David in disguise, Sue, Nicola, Susan, Alison, Kathleen, Lynette, that's my name, and Victoria and Carol. And all of those names are very different, and they all give you a sense of who that person might be, literally just by the name. Sorry, at the top we've got Tony and Linda and Neil there. So Michelle, sorry, I'm reading the names and not your like that. But all of those names give you a sense of who those people might be. And Grace, sorry, you're there next to me. And so names are very important. There are 2 things you need to remember about names. First of all, have a really good think about who your character is. Somebody's name can reflect their socioeconomic background and who their parents are, what part of the world they've come from. It can tell you a huge amount about their ethnic background, their age as well, because particular names are popular in particular periods. So for instance, if you're writing a book set in 1930, you're not likely to call your character Wayne. You want to be really try and be sensible about who this person is and what their background is and what they could be called. I do tend to find when I'm thinking about characters, so when I was thinking about Caroline and Rachel for The Darkroom, I knew what ages they were, and I've done this a lot with characters. I tend to know what age somebody is, so it's quite important for me to be able to work that out, to get a handle on who they are. And then I sort of work backwards to find out what year they were born in and what year they would have been, say, 16 in and what year they would have been 18 in. And then, so if I haven't got their name, I then go back to the baby names for that year. You can literally put it into Google, baby names 1949, girls' names 1949, and it'll show you the most popular names. And it really gives you a great selection to choose from. So in The Darkroom, we ended up with a character called Honoria, which I can't even pronounce, which was based on a character who's actually in Bleak House in the end. But I knew her name started with an H. And in the very first draft, I think she was Helen. And then she became Henrietta, or was it Harriet? Anyway, whatever, it was either Henrietta or Harriet or a version of that, but I couldn't spell it. So every single time I wrote it in the draft, I spelt it differently, and it just became a complete nightmare. Sometimes you just can't get your head. It's like Rachel in The Darkroom. I spelled that about 15 different ways too. Sometimes there are names like Claire is always one that catches me out because sometimes it's got an I and sometimes it hasn't. So be sure, have a really good think about the name and make sure it's a name that you can use. So then I was doing some research and I knew I needed an H name for this particular character, and she's not in the book because she's just talked about a lot. And she comes from a particular period and she's American. And that's sort of, I knew her background and stuff. And I wanted her to be a little bit different, I suppose, from your average character. And so I settled on that name in the end. So have a really good think about names because they tell you so much. I always think that there's a brilliant book by Meg Rossoff called I think it's called The Way We Live Now. It was made into a movie. It's a YA book, but she writes about a character called Daisy who comes over from New York, and she goes to live with her cousins who are very sort of aristocratic, upper middle class British kids who've come from quite a very well off family, but have lost all their money. So they live in this absolutely crumbling sort of stately home. But because they come from the type of background they come from, they're called Algernon and Sebastian and something else. I forgot what the other one is. But those names just tell you so much. Sebastian and Algernon tell you so much about who those characters might be in the contrast then to Daisy. Really think about names. They're really important. And you can change them. I mean, I regularly change them. I'm probably going to get the name wrong now, but in the Little Bones, the first book I wrote, the first Cat Connolly book, there's a woman whose name starts with L. She's Zoe's grandmother, and she was Lydia, she was Lavinia, she was, what else was she? She was something else. I tend to stick with the first letters and then change the name. And then I get to the point, I go and do an event, and I actually can't remember what I ended up calling her. So I look really silly, because really I should know what my character names are. But you know, you can change them. You can literally, you can do find and replace really easily. If you make sure there's a thing in Word called find and replace, click on the box where there's an advanced version of find and replace where you can match the case and only do whole words. Make absolutely certain you click those boxes if you're doing find and replace in a name, because otherwise what happens is if you've got a name that's like, to say, Tilly, and you want to change it to Jilly, everywhere you've got till written, it'll replace the till with the Jilly bit, and then you'll be in such a pickle, it'll be untrue. We've all done that at some point. So make sure you use the advanced function for find and replace, but it's brilliant. So you can change these names, and if something doesn't feel quite right, don't worry, just use the name that's sort of nearly right, and then you can have a think about it. And as the character reveals themselves to you more as you're writing, you'll find out more about it. The other really important thing about character names, I know I'm going on a lot about this, is that you need to make sure the initials are all different. Okay, so make sure that if you've got, like we've got, even here, we've got a Sinead and a Susan and a Sue. Now, if you put Sinead, Susan and Sue into a book, your reader is going to get very mixed up very quickly, because they're not going to be able to distinguish one character from another, and they're going to get mixed up. So what you want to try and do is make sure the names are different lengths, that they have different initial letters, that they sound different. You know, if you've got a Jack and a Mac, there's a good chance people are going to mix them up. We've all read books where we've had to go back a few chapters, or back a few pages, excuse me, to find out, because we've lost the thread of who's talking. And you don't want that to happen if you can avoid it, because that really can jar the reader out of the story. So try and look for names that are distinctive, that speak to you, that tell you and tell your reader about that character and who that character is, and where they come from and what their background is. They don't have to be fancy, they can just be ordinary names, but that, you know, put some thought into them and really work at them. So that's important. The different initial letters is really, really very important. When we meet your character, and I'm talking to people about sort of you meeting your character for the first time when you introduce them into your story. First off, I like to do a lot of research in terms of who this character is. So I want to know, as I said before, how old they were, when they, what year were they 16 and what year were they 18? And I tend to try and find out what the hit records were in those years. I want to get a sense of what they were listening to. It just gives me a feel for who they would be, because all of us have records that come on the radio that we associate things with. And so it's really important that you just get a sense, I suppose, of who they are and their place in the world, and you know, maybe the world events that were going on at the time that they were 18 or 20 or 22 or whatever. Think about their educational background. Where did they go to school? Did they go to an ordinary state school? Did they go to a private school? Did they go to university? Did they go and do an apprenticeship? Did they go to college? You know, if they went to school, did they get a lift to school? Did they walk? Did they get the bus? Those type of details are the things that form your character as a person. And I think for me, it's really important just to get a sense of who that character is, to get through some of those details. You know, are they the type of person who'd be on the hockey team? Or are they the type of person who'd be, you know, a rugby captain? Or are they the type of person that sits at the back of the class and just keeps quiet because they're very, very industrious, or perhaps they should be sitting at the front of the class if they're very industrious. But you know, what type of person are they? What are their likes? What are their hopes? What are their fears? That's really important. What's the thing that they value most in the world? What do they love? You know, do they have kids? Do they have pets? Do they have, if they're very driven, what's the flip side of that? If they're very driven and they're very focused and they are you know, very intent on doing a particular thing, what's the soft side of that? Everybody has dark and light in their character. So really have a think about that. And I tend to make notes then on the characters. They can just be bullet points. They don't have to be, it doesn't have to be written in prose. But literally bullet points, you know, and what year, I always try and put the years in. So what year did they, if they were born in 1949, what year does that mean they went to school? What year did they go to university? What year? Because those things then all start to knit together as you get a whole bunch of characters. You can start to see the intersections. You might find that two characters went to the same school, or you might find that two characters lived down the road from each other, or that maybe they were both in the same university at the same time, even if they came from opposite sides of the world or the country. And those connections start to appear. So those notes are really, really important. But when we meet them as readers, We don't need to know all that. Ernest Hemingway talks about the iceberg. He talks about a pyramid, like an iceberg, literally, where there is 7/8 is below the water and 1/8 is on the top. And you as a writer need to know the 7/8 that's below the surface. Okay, you need to know these characters inside out and backwards in order for them to be consistent and to be well-rounded on the page. But the reader only needs that top bit. And you'll sort of panic a bit and you're thinking, oh yeah, but I didn't say where she went to school. But in fact, that'll drip through your prose, because as you write, the knowledge that you have will just come through. So when we meet a character for the first time, it's very important for you to try and anchor them in the reader's mind. So it could be that we really need a physical characteristic. What you're trying to do always when you're writing is to paint a picture for the reader, so the reader can see what you can see when you're writing, because obviously you've got an impression of you know what these people look like and then where they are, and so then description becomes important. But we don't need tons of it. We don't need loads of backstory. We just need enough so that we remember who that character is, and as we read more about them and more in that particular scene, we'll learn more, and these details will come through. So think about when you go to a party or you're in a bar and you meet somebody for the first time. Party is always a good situation because, you know, there can be people milling around, and then you're introduced to somebody and they say their name, and then often they might say what they do, or it's, you know, how do you know the host or whatever. And usually in the first 20, 30 seconds, you form a picture of who that person is. And that picture, that 30-second picture, is made up from their name, from something they're wearing generally, or what they look like. You know, if they've got tattoos all over them and earrings everywhere, then you're going to think one thing about them. If they're wearing, you know, top hat and tails, you're going to come up with something else. So that physical description and the look of the person is important. And it's that, I always think it's that 30-minute or 30-second sketch is what you're trying to give your reader. So that they are as if they were meeting that person at the party. They have just enough information. They don't have everything. They don't know everything about this character. They don't know how they got to the party. They don't know, you know, where they work necessarily, or what they do, or any of that detail, how many kids they've got, you know, any of that. But they do have enough information just to form a picture so that when they read on and that character appears again, they remember who they are. And then what you're doing is you're building up those character profiles as you go through the book. So we're learning a little bit more about them each time. And it just means then that as you go through the book and you're learning a little bit more each time, as a reader, those characters they feel real to you. They become cemented in your head and they feel like they're real people. And those are the type of people that you want to read on about. One of the crucial things in fiction is to make the reader to have a bit of a hook at the start of the story so that the reader actually wants to read on. These characters have to be interesting enough and have something happening to them that's interesting enough that is worth your time, putting time in to read the book. Because just because you're writing a book doesn't mean people are going to want to read it. And so your job as a writer is to keep those readers engaged and to make them, you know, if you think about it, that you've got a contract as an author, you have a contract with your reader. You know, if I have a book on the shelf, if I have, say, The Dark Room sitting on the shelf, and you've paid £15 for it, that's £15 for your hard-earned money. And then I'm asking you to sit down and spend 7 hours, potentially, depends how fast you read, 6 or 7 hours of your time, which is also precious, reading my book. So I need to make sure that I am delivering you £15 plus 7 hours worth of interest, and enough that you want to then go off and tell somebody else how amazing this book is. That's my plan anyway. That's where I'm coming from, hoping. So that's what your challenge is when you are writing your book. And characters for me are one of the easiest, not necessarily the easiest, but definitely one of the key ways of doing that, of engaging your reader, of making them want to read on, of giving them people who are interesting and you know, can show them something a little bit about the world outside their own world. I did an interview with Alex Michaelides on Friday. It's on the Writing.ie Facebook page, and he wrote a book called The Maidens. He originally wrote The Silent Patient, which sold in 50 different countries and was the first British debut ever to hit the New York Times bestseller list in the #1 slot. So it's like stunning. It was such a brilliant interview. He's so humble, and he's obviously so talented. And he started off in screenwriting, and everything was a total failure. And then he wrote this book. But it was really interesting because we were talking about characters and how characters reveal themselves and how important characters are, and also how he likes, or I was saying I love when I read a book to learn something new that I don't know about the world, about people. And he was saying the same thing. So his character is in The Maidens is a psychotherapist called Mariana. So we learn quite a lot about psychotherapy, which is really interesting to me anyway. But also he's got Greek tragedy, because he's Greek, running through the book, through the storyline. And so you learn loads about sort of Greek tragedy in the background to what's going on, and different stories and all sorts of bits and pieces. So it's fascinating. So in addition to this amazing story, there's sort of another layer there, which is something you might learn that's a bit different. And that is what your characters are supplying. So if your character is a vet, or they're a deep sea diver, or they're doing something interesting, then you're going to learn a little bit about you. Well, you need to make sure as a writer that you learn quite a lot about that world, but as a reader, you're going to have access to a new world. And I always think that's fascinating. So all of that detail is worth planning out in the early stages. I think that one thing I was talking about last time was that scaffolding that you need to build a book. And the characters are part of that scaffolding. Now, some of you might be very organic writers and you don't want to spend ages planning, and you don't have to go into necessarily that level of detail, but you do have to have a sense of who those characters are. Often you might find that you want to write, I think I mentioned last time, a friend of mine called Alex Marwood, who is a amazing writer, and when she starts writing a book, she doesn't plan anything, and she writes what she calls the stuff, which could be 40,000 words of stuff. But that stuff frees her up just to be able to write her way into the story. It's not stuff that's necessarily going to end up in a book. It might end up in the book, but she's not writing it for that purpose. She's writing it so she can find the story and find the characters. So if you're a very organic writer, you might find that writing stuff will help you get into the story and will help you learn more about those characters. So yeah, so their backstory, the backstory of the characters is important for you to understand and for you to get right. You can do it, you can write the whole draft and then go back, and then by the time you get to the end of the draft and you know those characters really well, you're going to have to go right back to the beginning and make sure that you've got everything and it's consistent all the way through, because characters do evolve as you write, and you might discover something about them at the end that you didn't know at the beginning. But that needs to then be, when you go back through for the next draft, you want to perhaps look at foreshadowing that. So, you can see, you might discover, let's say, for instance, that somebody's allergic to oranges, and that comes out in the last chapter. So we need to see some sort of consistency all the way through the book. If you've only realised right at the end, that won't have been incorporated in, and it's hinted at or alluded to along the way, just to foreshadow it, particularly if it's an important plot point. So those are some key things about thinking about your characters. Now, characters, as I say, drive story, and so the point of view that you write from and the point of view you choose to tell your story from is also vital, and that we're back to character again for that. And there are loads of different ways of telling a story. You want to, obviously, once you've got your plot sorted out and you've got an idea who your characters are going to be, is it going to be a dual narrative like The Dark Room, where we get Caroline, then we get Rachel, then we get Caroline, then we get Rachel, and we sort of overlap them all the way through the book? Is it going to be, I was just reading Faith Hogan's book, which I'm now looking for on my desk here, which is called the Ladies Midnight Swimming Club, and she has 5 points of view in that book. So she's got 3 women, and then she's got 2 guys as well, and then she alternates each one as she goes through. So is that going to be the way that you tell the story? Is it all going to be in first person from one person's point of view? If it's a detective story, quite often, if you read Jane Casey, or I'm trying to think who else writes in first person, Jane Casey writes a lot of her Maeve Kerrigan books in first person. You're seeing it entirely through Maeve's eyes, and you're discovering the story as that person discovers the story. So that's coming again back to character, point of view, and deciding how you're going to tell the story. And sometimes it can take a few goes. You're also into thinking about what tense you're going to use. I write very much in third person past tense, because that's where I feel most comfortable. But you can play around with tense. You can write in present tense, you can write in first person, and all of those changes will make a difference to how your reader reads the book and how you tell that story. And sometimes you can't make a decision right at the start. Sometimes you have to play around. I'm writing the stuff at the moment for a book which won't be out. I don't even know when it'll be out. I think it's 2023 if it all comes together. But I don't know when. I didn't know what voice I was using, and I thought I might use first person voice, but I couldn't get comfortable writing that. That felt like really hard work. It wasn't flowing. So now I'm using a third person present tense voice for some chapters. and a third person past tense voice for some other chapters. And I'm going to probably interleave them, but I don't know for sure yet. So I'm actually in that process of writing the stuff where I'm playing around and I'm testing, and I'm but what you can do, which is really helpful, is to try and write 500 words in whatever that point of view is, and see what feels comfortable, see what feels right. And some of it you'll use and some of it you won't. But it means then you're not labouring, you know, you might say, okay, well, this book is a book about a detective, and so therefore it's going to have to be in first person. And, you know, but it's hard work, just even getting that voice captured on the page. And the most important thing is that that writing flows for you, and that it isn't hard work. I mean, there's lots of hard work involved, but that it's the actual writing process isn't something you have to be thinking about every single word. So do test it out, write 500 words, you know, see how it feels, write 500 words of description. You can write 500 words of backstory. You know, maybe your character has, well, all characters have a significant moment in their life. They have a moment that in romance they call it their wound. What is the thing that happened to them that changed their personality? We've all got something in our lives where something big happened, and you know, it might be a car accident, or it could be just, you know, terrible A-level results or fantastic A-level results. You know, it could be anything. But it's something that slightly changed our path. And so when you're thinking about characters, try and identify what that thing is for that character. And if you want to sort of get a feel for what their voice is, perhaps write 500 words about that particular moment in their lives, just to get a sense of who they are. What else do I need to tell you about this? Yeah, so I think testing it out is always really important. You know, and if you might find that you're 2/3 of the way through your novel and you're struggling with something, or it's not working, or you just have a niggle. And it could be something simple like, well, I say simple, changing points of view, or adding in an extra one, or just thinking about who those characters are and how you tell that story. Sarah Webb is a very good friend of mine, and she wrote one book years ago now. She wrote the whole book in third person and then decided that she didn't like it and it wasn't working. So she changed it into first person, the entire book. And then when she finished that, she decided it doesn't work. So she changed it back into third person. So, you know, you can play around. I wouldn't recommend that because it's just such a lot of work. But don't be frightened of the work, because every time you go over a draft, the book gets better, literally every single time. So every time you're going over it and over and over it, you're improving the book and you're making it better, and that's a good thing. So yeah, it can be very painful when you write things and you have to bin them, or you delete them, or you have to move things around. No, there's no option to change tense on Word. No, Grace, unfortunately. it wouldn't work, because when you write, there are many, particularly when you're writing, if you're writing a flashback scene, your flashback is going to be in a different tense from your main part of the chapter anyway, so you couldn't change a whole book. You're using different tenses all the way through a book. So yeah, no, it would be even for the bulk of it. So that's it. So we don't want to know too much backstory when we meet your character. If you've got a postman who's delivering a really important letter to a house, and the letter is the thing that's going to be the explosive moment that's going to kick the whole story off, we don't need to know what the postman's name was, or even, you know, we don't need to know where he went to school or what his dog's name is. We just need to know that he delivered the letter. So don't feel that every single time we meet a new character, we have to know who they are. As I say, this is just remember Hemingway's Iceberg. You need to know, because actually maybe the postman's dog's name is really important and it comes up later, but the reader doesn't necessarily need to know that point. The most important thing in that scene is that that letter is delivered. And one of the classic things with new writers, and I did it too, is delivering us huge chunks of backstory every single time we meet anybody. Is you know, that you feel that you need to tell us who this person is and show us loads of stuff about them. But we don't. It's just that. Think about that, meeting somebody at the party in the first 30 seconds, and that's all we need. We just need enough that we're not going to forget who they are. So if they've got one leg, we need to know when we first meet them. You know, if they've got a blonde crew cut, or they've got tattoos, or whatever it is that you would notice about that person when you first meet them, that's what you want to make sure the reader has. Yeah, don't surprise them with the one leg later in the book. There's one story I was reading a thing about an audiobook narrator, and they usually audiobook narrators, if they're really good ones, read the book first, right the way from the beginning to the end, and then they'll go and record it. But not everybody has time to do that. So some of the ones who maybe have done hundreds of audiobooks might just literally go to the studio, sit down, start reading, and that's the first time they've read the book. And this particular audiobook reader got to like page 275 and discovered that the character had a lisp. like, and they hadn't had a list all the way through because they didn't know, because the writer had gotten to tell them. So, you know, that important. It's like somebody having one leg. There's no point telling us they've got one leg in chapter 5. Do you know what I mean? Because we've already formed an opinion about who they are. And you know, we had 2 legs all the way to through chapters 1 to 4. So you know, just think about that 30 seconds, that meeting. What was, and practice it. You know, when you meet people, when you see somebody in the supermarket, go, when you're walking around, look at them and just think about, who do I think that person is? You know, what, I do this all the time. What have they got in their basket? What are they wearing? What's their story? You know, if there's a chap in front of you in the supermarket thing, and he's got one thing of cat food and a couple of ready meals and one thing of beer, then, you know, I start to feel sorry for him, because he probably lives on his own with his cat, you know. So I don't know, maybe not, maybe he was just shopping for somebody else. But you know, maybe he's a really lovely guy and he shops for his elderly next door neighbour, and that's her shopping. So there's the story in absolutely everything. But look at the people around you and look at the opinions that you form and analyze your opinions. And that's what you need to use then in your book when we're first meeting characters, because characters are what lift a book. Characters are what you remember. You know, when you think about the books that you've read and really, really loved, it tends to be, you don't know anything about the author. I mean, they're just gone, but it's the characters that you remember. Often it's not even the plot. It's just a particular person sticks in your head. So they're really, really, really vital, absolutely part of the sort of the building blocks of writing a great story. And I would highly recommend as well, I'm going to switch you over so you can ask questions now in a second, but highly recommend creating, when you write a book, if you can, a character Bible at the very start. Okay, so I use, I think I mentioned it before, I use this Scrivener thing, which is like it's like a program that you download onto your characters are what you miss when you finish good. Yes, exactly. So characters, that's just Sue saying to everybody that characters are what you miss. Absolutely, because you feel like you know them, don't you? That's where you're trying to get to. I use this thing called Scrivener, and basically it's I don't even know why I use and not use Word, but it's very handy because it has this little thing down the side where when you start a new project, where you can put you can have little tabs for all your characters, so you can have a different name for every tab. And then I have a research section, and I put all the random bits of research into there. And I find it really handy, because when I'm reading, if I find something on the internet, like I'm reading The Guardian or something, I find something useful, I can literally just copy the link and I lash it straight into Scrivener. So I might be doing a thing about where I'm studying polar bears and icebergs, and I've got a whole load of things about icebergs in Scrivener. And then every time I find anything, I can just stick it in. And often I never actually go back and check it, but I've got it saved. So I use Scrivener for each of the characters. And I literally have a different file for each one, but I do try and have one page where I've got all the names listed, because then you can see if there's any patterns in the names and if you've reused an initial letter. Because literally I have one book, I can't remember which one it was, I think it was No Turning Back, where I changed a couple of names. I did my find and replace and matched my case, and it was all great. And then when I read it over, I discovered I had a Bess, a Tess and a Jess, and one of them was a dog. I mean, like, that's not going to work, is it? So, but I honestly had no clue until I literally went back and read the book that I'd managed to do this. It was because I was busy changing names, you know. So keep a character Bible. And sorry, somebody's asking how you spell it. I'm going to put it in the chat here. Is the chat the best place for it? Scrivener, I think I can do that. Scrivener. Oops, I've even spelt it wrong. There we go. But there's an article on writing.ie. If you go into writing.ie and you just put Scrivener in the search bar, there's a great article that tells you how it works. And Sheila Flanagan uses it and Alex Barkley, and there's links to find it at the bottom of the page. So that's a useful one for everybody. I just find it handy. I don't use it for writing in. You can write in it, and then it compiles all your chapters and stuff, but you can't get my head around that. So I literally write in Word, and I have one document and I write it from beginning to end. But Scrivener is really useful for research, because you can just keep putting bits in, and I put photographs of my characters in. I'll tell you about. So you can probably see behind me the dark room thing here. So I get photographs of my characters really early on. People I've got in my head. There's Caroline from the dark room. Hi, Rachel. There's Rachel. I think she's a newsreader for Channel 4. I've no idea who any of these people are. That's Hunter. He's the guy who was on the X Factor. Kevin, who's on the X Factor. So I never know who people are, and I'm not interested. I just want the people who look like the people in my head. And so then I create, now this is absolutely nothing to do with procrastination at all, but then I create a storyboard, which has the various locations on it as well. This is the, in the dark room, there is a a jail in the, you can't see it very well there, but there's a jail in right at the end, which becomes very significant, in the grounds of Hare's Landing, and that literally is the jail that gave me the idea. I was sitting opposite that when I literally sitting here when I was sitting, you could see this girl Caroline running along the beach. So there's all sorts of bits there. There's Jasper, who's the dog, who's in it too. So I literally created a storyboard, and I find that really useful. I found this most useful when I started writing Little Bones. The dressmaker one here. My desk. I've been doing this for years, so I've got loads of them. That's not the dressmaker, that's something else. I find it so useful because if you're busy and you have to leave the book for a couple of days or even a couple of weeks or whatever it is, somebody's saying that's exactly how you picture Caroline. Thank you, that's brilliant. I managed to convey her on the page as well. So if you're busy, if you've got pictures in front of you, it's like they're calling to you the whole time. So when I wrote The Dressmaker, I had little kids and everything, and it took me ages. So I had the storyboard in front of me, and all the characters were looking at me the whole time. And I just find it really useful. So I've got another one. I've just finished a book about a character called Carla Steele, and that's her there at the top. See, there's all sorts of different people, and they're different places. So literally I try and create them for everything. I'm just starting something new, and I have all pictures cut out. I literally just print them off the internet. This one here, there you go. There's a location shot at the top there, and then this is about a woman who's a QC, this next one I'm writing, so she's going to be there, and I'll cut them out, stick them on a storyboard, and then it's like I've captured the story. And even if I decide then not to write that book now and maybe write another one, that does happen occasionally, once I've got the storyboard done, I've like captured the story and I can always come back to it. I feel like it's safe and secure. So that's my storyboarding. So has anybody got any questions? Do you want if you want to stick your cameras and your voices on, what's the word, volume on? Has anybody got any questions, or any questions from any other week we did actually as well? If anybody missed anything? I'm terrified into silence now. Tony, fire away.
Hi Sam, thanks very much. That was really enjoyable and comprehensive. I'm just wondering, would you say my interest is short stories? Would you say all of what you said applies equally, or short story you just don't have enough space to develop or express your character? In that sense, is there anything that might apply a little bit on the character theme, particularly to short stories?
Yeah, I mean, definitely think about their name if you're going to use their name. Short stories are very much a snapshot of somebody's life, and in fact, you can write a short story about two characters, and we never know who they are, because that's the nature of the beast, I suppose. And often I find that characters again are still very important, and that they're going to drive your short story. So you're going to need to know a little bit about them, but quite often you'll find it as you're writing. It's a much more manageable size, isn't it? So yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily spend ages and ages working out who they are, because they're only going to have to do you for maybe 2,000 or 7,000 words as opposed to 100,000. But definitely that thinking about who their names and how they relate and who they are, I think is important. I think that helps drive the story. So definitely, yeah. So useful in the sense that you need to know who they are. But you don't need that same level of depth for a few thousand words.
Thank you.
That's useful.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing about a novel. It's so long, and it's such a long piece of work, and you're with them for so long, these characters, that if you can, the more you know about them, the more you can get right and easier, and it becomes. So I think that can be really, really useful. Let me just check the chat and see if there's any questions in there. Oh yeah, we've got Scrivener. Oh, I think we're all right. We're good on. There's nothing there in the chat. So what are people writing at the moment? Have you got your characters sussed? Do you think you've got your characters sussed? Any of you? Share. Tell us who you're writing about. Does anybody want to be brave? Not yet. I've just finished a book called it'll be out in January, called Remember My Name, and it features a character called Briony O'Brien, who this is when a character Bible becomes very important. I actually wrote a book about that. I decided, this is a bit complicated, but I wrote a book that was supposed to be following Keep Your Eyes on Me, and then I decided that the pacing wasn't quite right for it, and it was much more like a Kat Conley book. And so I decided I'd park it, and then I literally, while I was on holiday finishing it, was when I had the idea for the Darkroom, and I thought, well, I think this is going to be a better idea, so I'm going to write that one instead. And so I went back to my editor, and she had this book called High Pressure, and she really liked it, and she thought it was fine, but I said, no, we'll try and write the Darkroom. So High Pressure featured this character called Briony O'Brien, who is quite a tech genius, and in High Pressure, she is just about to go to university. But I really loved her as a character. She's got a tattoo, and she's got pink hair, and she's got this double undercut, and she's very sassy. And I really wanted to use her again. And so in the book I've just written, Remember My Name, she's the key character in that book. But when I was writing her, then in the next book, which is, we're now in 2021, so that's set in 2021, and High Pressure was set in, I don't know, 2018 or something. I realized that if High Pressure ever did come out, I needed to make sure the two synced, and I'd made a whole load of mistakes. I actually got quite stuck because in High Pressure, I thought Briony was going off to study in America, to MIT. But then I discovered when I started writing the next one, Remember My Name, that actually the degrees in MIT are 5 years long, not 3. And I needed to have done a master's by the time we came around to her again, and various other things had to be in place, and they just couldn't be from the way I'd set her up. So I actually had to go back to High Pressure, make a few changes there, and then be aware of that when I came through to Remember My Name. But it was really strange. Your subconscious mind is such a powerful tool. And it was 2 years ago that I wrote High Pressure, and I've basically forgotten the entire story pretty much, bar the key points. But my subconscious mind was the bit that got me stuck. So when I was writing Briony's story, I got completely stuck, and I couldn't work out why. And I suddenly realized that it had to be to do with her and her timing and her age and all those types of things. So there was lots then that had to be changed to make sure that all these things worked. And had I written everything down in the first instance and paid attention to it and gone back to it, maybe got the right notes, I could have saved myself a whole lot of bother. So I highly recommend doing that. So now they said, writing about a girl whose parents are missing, presumed dead, and her granny. And now I'm debating whether or not to change the granny to the mother. I think that I need to be more open to change. Yeah, being open to change is really important. It's really hard because you know that there's work to do to make those changes. But do listen to your gut. I'm absolutely such a firm believer that you actually inside you know what the right answer is. And if you're getting a niggle, then usually follow that thing. So if you're getting a niggle that maybe it should be the mother, absolutely, Sue, follow that niggle, because what happens, what holds you back is the thought of, oh god, all this work and all the changes. But actually you might find when you go back in that it's not as much as you think. But in fact that if you do change that relationship, that it'll give you some more powerful plot points that weren't in there before, that'll help drive the story along. So yeah, give it a go, see what happens. Because the other thing is, fear of work is a really big one. The other thing is, really importantly, is every time you write a new draft of something, save it with a different date. Okay, so when I get to the point where I'm getting to an editing stage, quite often I write the first draft right the way through, beginning to end. It's a fast write. I just want to throw the story down on the page, and some of it can be complete nonsense, and I repeat myself, and it's just terrible. But that doesn't matter, because that's what a first draft is all about. I would say it needs to be a real hot mess. And when you come back to the subsequent drafts, save, like so Sue, when you do yours, save your new version with a new date. So same title, but new date. Okay, so that it's a different document. And that means that if you ever have to go back to her being the granny, or that there's maybe a couple of paragraphs in the granny's voice that you really love that you're going to need to bring through into the new manuscript, you've still got them. And then it doesn't feel like so much work, because if you're changing a document that you spent lots of time working on, and you feel like you're deleting bits and changing things around, it can be quite heartbreaking, and there's a sort of fear in there as well. But if you're writing it into a new document, you've saved the whole of the old one, and so nothing's going to be lost. And it just mentally, it helps you hugely. And it also is particularly useful if you need to add something. I deleted an entire chapter in Remember My Name, and then changed my mind and decided I wanted it back again. So I had to go back and find an earlier draft, just with a couple of days beforehand, and I was able to reinstate the entire chapter, because that does happen, when you're moving bits around. So yeah, absolutely try and save it. It does mean you'll end up with loads of drafts too. I must have 50 or 60 drafts for Little Bones, all saved under the date. Every single time I went in to change something, I literally saved it as a new document, so that then you've got that progression, and you don't lose anything, and you feel like you don't feel like you're deleting anything, so you don't feel like you're losing work, if you can manage to do that. So what's anybody else writing? Has anybody else got any character queries or issues? See, you can pop them into the chat. I think characters are wonderful. I think they're the most exciting thing about writing. You know, finding new characters and finding characters that do unusual things. I'm writing about the new character of the book. I just showed the picture I just showed you there. The woman is senior counsel, and I'm thrilled because I found a senior counsel in the law library who's helping me, and I've had a big chat to her on the phone the other day. And it's the little details about somebody's job like that that is really interesting. So like, where does she have her lunch, you know, and is there a ladies' loo on her floor, and stuff like that. That's just small details that really make it live for the reader, because we can imagine some of the bigger things, but it's the little details that happen in real life are the things that I always find really fascinating, and that you can build character on. So anybody else got any other questions? You must have some. It doesn't have to be about character, it can be about anything.
I'm having a bit of issues with a novel I'm writing, and it's kind of I can't figure out whether to make the character dead and from a dead person's point of view, and then the other side of it is I keep fighting whether I'm going to write it as a fiction or fiction based on true life, because I think if I do true life, I could get into like sticky things with like legal things. Yeah,
writing true life is really tricky, especially if you, and writing fiction as true life is really tricky. That's even trickier because you've come away from the truth and you've made bits up, and then people can't tell which bits are made up and which bits are true. One of the things Carla Gebler talks about, I think this is a great phrase, I find that if you write things too close to the truth, so if you base a character on somebody you know too closely, what can happen is you get hobbled by the truth. And that's the Carla's word, is hobbled, because you're trying to stick to the character so much that you're not letting the fiction flow, you know, and you're not letting them, excuse me, become the fictional character they need to be. They're still anchored in the truth, and that can present problems, because you might have made slight changes, but you haven't made them consistent. Do you know what I mean? Right the way across the board. So I think if you're writing, for me, I think try and stick with fiction because it's a much safer area. If you're writing a character that's dead, then if we know she's dead at the start, then you want to be thinking about, well, why do we need to read the book? Because if she's already dead, you know, it's like if that's something that's apparent. You read Lovely Bones by, is it Alice Sebold, is it? She wrote Lovely Bones? But the book is called Lovely Bones, and it's about a character who's dead, and but it's brilliantly done, and really brilliantly done. It was a huge success, because I think you need to read some books like that to see how people have handled it, because you can absolutely do it, and it can be her voice coming back to us, and we might not know she's dead. Sorry?
That's a film as well, isn't it?
Say again?
That's a film as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it was book first.
Yeah, I think I saw that actually. It was very good, but it was.
Yeah, well, go back and read the book and see how she did it, because it'll show you structure. Reading is the most important thing when you're a writer. Absolutely the most important thing, because you're understanding when you read. Every time you read, especially when you're writing, you're analysing. You know, Tony, if you're reading short stories, you know, get Louise Kennedy's short story collection, The End of the Road is a Cul-de-sac. Get Sinead Gleason's short story collection, and compare them and see how they've handled story and how do they work and how do these stories work. And the same with novels. You know, if you're writing YA, make sure you're reading YA. If you're writing crime, read crime. Find out and analyse how the readers have done it and how the writers have done it, how they delivered the story, because that's absolutely crucial to you then learning and working out how you can deliver the story. Yeah, but I would definitely, Grace, I'd try and, I mean, unless you want to write a memoir, definitely steer away from the truth if you can, and let the fiction fly, and then decide. Then you need to, then I would write the things in different voices, and it might well be that the dead character's voice comes through really clearly, you know, as somebody sort of slightly removed, and that you want to put her in, or that you don't want to put her in because obviously because she's dead. You know, you don't want to use her voice at all. You don't have to. She could be the person that hinges the story because everybody's trying to find out what happened to her. So yeah, there's lots of different ways. There's always lots of different ways to approach a story. If you've got a core idea for a story, play around with it, plot it out, write blurbs, you know, write a synopsis, because a one pager is very easy to manage. You know, you can write an overview of a story, and as you're writing it, ideas start to connect. And if it works, then, you know, sit on it for a week, and does it work? Does it not work? How could you change it? How could you make it better? And those sort of blurby things, or those sort of short synopsis, will show you the different ways that you could write that story. Because there's always, you know, I chose to write The Dark Room through the voices of Rachel and Caroline, but equally I could have written it using Hunter. I could have written it from the housekeeper's point of view. You know, there's lots of the police officer's point of view, and use the same story. So there's lots of other ways of doing things, always. What you need to do, I always think a story has a voice, and this is a big thing for short stories, is that a short story has its own voice and it has its own length, and it sort of arrives somehow in your head, and guides you nearly. I think a novel does too. So it's that voice is finding, but it can take you a while to find out what that voice actually is, and who those characters are, and which ones you're going to use, and how many you're going to use, and who we're going to see, whose world we're going to see right into, and whose world you want to hide, you know. Yeah, play around with it. Write the stuff. That's what they say. Write the stuff. Alex Marwood says, write the stuff. Play around with your characters, because they are crucial. And when you get them right, everything works. So that's so important. There we go. So I think we're nearly done in terms of time. Oh yes, I was like, who's that? So I can't see the name. Who's liking the storyboards?
Michelle.
Yeah. I love it. I think the storyboards are so useful, because you can see the story then, and you can find the pictures, and it doesn't matter who they are, because I say nobody's going to see it. That's I'm always a bit worried showing people them, because every now and again I use, like, you know, somebody from RTE, and I don't, you know, I might not know who they are, or I never know who characters are in films, and you know, you end up putting them on a board and you're like, oh god, that's somebody, a real person. Actually, I have been killing somebody in my book, so I have to be careful. But it's just for you. It's just, you know, it's for you to just help visualize your story, because at the end of the day, it's a very visual medium, and that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to create pictures in your head, to convert them into words, so that they become pictures in your reader's head. And obviously, as Simon Scarrow said when I interviewed him the other day, your reader is bringing 50% of that picnic, because they have their own feelings and impressions and stuff that they're bringing in too. So they're very important people in the process. So 2 more minutes. Has anybody else got any more questions? And still not brave enough to write. Just get started, and you can't go wrong. Nobody has to see it. Honestly, nobody has to see it. So when you write a first draft, and like literally the first draft is absolutely going to be a hot mess. You can expect that. Expect it to be terrible. It's not the X Factor. It doesn't have to be perfect first time. And then when you've got the words down, you found the story, then you can start to shape it, and play around with it. Yeah, but don't be held back by fear, because nobody ever has to see it. You never have to send it out. It's just for you at the start. You know, you never have to get it. You're never going to be. I think a lot of people don't write because they're worried about getting rejected, because you hear about people getting rejected all the time. But if you don't send it out, it's not going to be rejected. So it's not, you know, don't worry about that. Just write the thing for yourself. And literally that first draft is going to be an absolute terrible hot mess, and that's fine, because that's what you want it to be, while you're trying to find the story. Yeah, someone's saying, yeah, you can't, Grace, yeah, you can't edit a blank page. That's what Jodie Picoult always says. So go for it, give it a go, and see where it takes you. Yeah, this is first draft. Yeah, definitely, Sinead. First draft, hot mess. That's fine. It's really fine. I mean, and you want it to be like that. Just keep writing, keep ploughing on. Don't try and edit it. When I was talking to Alex Michaelides the other day, he was saying, you know, the creative part is part of your brain, and the part that edits, they're two different halves. And if you try and edit as you go along, you can tangle yourself up in a knot, because you don't really know quite the way the story is going to turn out at the end. You know how you think it's going to turn out, but actually, if you just sit down and plough right the way through to the end, to the end of the story, then you'll find the story, and then when you go back over it, it'll be here. Mine's are terrible. I end up with people saying things that they couldn't possibly, you know, in chapter 3 they couldn't possibly have known, because it hasn't happened until chapter 6 yet. But you know, that's when you go back, and you're going back to fix those afterwards in the second draft, and that's what a second draft's all about. you know, and all the bits I repeat all the time because I keep thinking I haven't remembered to tell the reader this, and I need to actually say this person has, I don't know, green eyes, and so then the same person has green eyes, like, and it's mentioned 50 times, or I change the colour of their eyes, which is what I did remember my name, but fortunately we picked that up. So definitely. So yeah, Louise Kennedy is the other short story writer. I got it here. It's called The End of the Road is a Cul-de-sac, and it's just come out with Faber. And she was shortlisted for Short Story of the Year last year with a story called Sparring the Heather. There's loads of short stories actually on writing.ie. We publish the five, six, sometimes 7 or 8 short stories that are selected every year for the Short Story of the Year for you to vote on. So if you want to read a really big selection, and they're amazing because they're all so different, have a look at that. Go to writing.ie, but just put Short Story of the Year in and foosed around, you know, searching and clicking and fiddling around, and you should be able to find the stories, the voting page for the stories, and for the last 5-6 years, and they're just amazing stories, and by amazing, some writers nobody's ever heard of, you know, who are new, who are just starting out, and some writers who like John Boyne or Donal Ryan or, you know, Colin Tabine or whoever they might be. So there's a whole mixture. It's a great competition. So there we go, our hour is up. I can't remember what we're supposed to be doing next time, but I'm sure it's going to be interesting. I haven't got the list in front of me, and David might have it. He might be able to pop up there and tell us. But definitely be lovely to see you again next month, and hopefully you will have moved on a bit. And if you've any, you know, give yourself a month, see what you can do in that month, see how those characters develop, and you can check back in next month when we do the next stage, and we'll see how everybody's getting on. So can you remember what we're doing next month, David?
I don't have it in front of me. It's July 14th though.
Well, that's good. So yeah, so July 14th, put that in your diaries.
4 weeks.
Okay, and you'll get a reminder. Exactly. And we'll take you on to the next stage. Definitely. So it's great to have everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I'll stop recording. And we look forward to seeing you all very soon, I hope.
Thank you.